I didn't say a word when he said it. I just nodded, the way you do when someone says something so unexpected that your brain needs a few seconds to catch up with your ears. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just come back from my cardiologist appointment on Bloor Street, the one I'd been putting off for 3 months, and I was in a decent mood for the first time in weeks. My numbers were good. Better than expected, the doctor had said, for a man my age. 63 and still standing, I told her. She'd laughed. I came home to find my son-in-law sitting at my kitchen table, eating the leftover pasta my daughter had made the night before, eating it cold, straight from the container with a fork he hadn't bothered to wash. I noticed the sink was full of dishes. The recycling bag I'd asked him to take out 4 days ago was still sitting by the door. I put my coat on the hook. I set my keys on the counter, and he looked up at me like I was the one who'd just walked into his house. "We need to talk," he said, "about the basement." That was how it started. My name is Gordon. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a structural engineer for the City of Toronto, retired 2 years ago with a pension I'd earned down to the last decimal point, and I own a semi-detached house in Scarborough that I bought in 1994 for $212,000 and which, as of last year, was assessed at just over $1.1 million. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because it matters for what comes next. My wife June passed away 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We'd been married 34 years, raised one daughter, built something quiet and good together. After she was gone, the house felt like a museum, every room holding something she'd touched, something she'd chosen, something that still smelled faintly like her if you stood still long enough. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter because that's all she is, all she's ever been to me. The best thing I ever had a hand in, was 29 when her mother died. She was already with him by then, had been for 2 years. She'd brought him to Sunday dinners, introduced him to June 6 months before the diagnosis. June had smiled and been polite. Later, alone in the kitchen washing up, she'd said to me, "He talks about himself a lot." I'd said, "He's young." She'd said, "So is your father and he always asks questions." I should have listened to June. I always should have listened to June. His name is Derek. He was 31 when they got married 3 years ago. My daughter was 32. I stood at the front of that reception hall in Mississauga, gave a speech about love and partnership and the particular courage it takes to build a life with another person, and I meant every word of it, the parts about my daughter anyway. Derek's family sat at the head table. His mother drank steadily through the whole evening, and his father, whom I met once and never again, shook my hand too hard. When my daughter asked, 6 months after the wedding, whether they could move into the basement suite while they got on their feet, I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my daughter. The suite was empty. The only cost was a little less quiet and a little more pasta in the fridge. What I didn't account for was Derek's particular relationship with the concept of temporary. 18 months. That was how long they'd been in the basement when he sat at my table eating cold pasta and told me we needed to talk about the basement. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning back in my chair, the one I'd had for 15 years, the one with the worn left armrest, that it makes more sense financially for us to take over the main floor. I stood by the counter. I didn't sit down. "You're on a fixed income," he continued like this was a fact he'd looked up and was now reporting to me. "The main floor is wasted space for one person. The basement has everything you'd need." I looked at him for a long moment. The fork was still in his hand. "Where is your wife?" I asked. "My daughter." "At work." He shrugged. "I wanted to talk to you alone first, man to man." I poured myself a glass of water. I drank it standing at the sink. Through the window, I could see the backyard, the garden June had planted along the fence, the Japanese maple she'd chosen specifically because she liked the way it turned red in October. "I'll think about it," I said. He seemed pleased with that, like he'd expected an argument and was relieved to have been spared one. I did think about it. All night I thought about it, not about whether to do it. That was never a serious question. I thought about what the fact of him asking it revealed, about the architecture of his thinking, about what it meant that he had calculated my pension, assessed my square footage, and arrived at the conclusion that he was entitled to present me with a proposal for taking over my own home. I thought about a lot of things that night. I thought about the HELOC I'd quietly extended on the house 18 months ago when I first started worrying that retirement income alone might not stretch as comfortably as I'd planned. I thought about the joint bank account I'd set up, stupidly, in retrospect, to make household expenses easier between the three of us. I thought about the $4,200 in shared grocery and utility costs that had come out of that account over the past year, a figure that seemed mathematically inconsistent with how often I was actually eating at home versus how often there were Derek's gym supplements on the counter and Derek's video game subscription on the cable bill. I thought about my daughter, who worked full-time as a dental hygienist, who came home tired every evening, who sometimes sat with me on the back porch and talked about nothing important in the way that only people who love each other can. I thought about how she looked these past few months, a little more tired than the work alone should explain, a little quieter. I thought about June and what she would have said. I already knew. I didn't bring it up with my daughter that week. I watched. I paid attention to things I'd been too comfortable to notice before. The way Derek referred to our house when talking to his friends on the phone. The way the refrigerator had slowly been colonized by his protein drinks and his craft beer, pushing my groceries to the bottom shelf. The way he'd once offhandedly mentioned to someone that his father-in-law was set. The word set meaning, apparently, that I had resources he considered relevant to his life planning. 2 weeks after the kitchen conversation, I called my financial advisor. I asked him to walk me through the exact process of removing Derek from the joint household account. My daughter was a different matter. She'd stay on it, obviously. But Derek's name had been added as an afterthought 18 months ago, a convenience that I was beginning to understand had been more convenient for him than for me. I also called a lawyer, a wills and estates lawyer I'd used once before, a practical woman in her 50s with an office near Young and Eglinton. I'd updated my will after June died. I wanted to review it again. I want to be clear, I wasn't planning a dramatic exit. I wasn't manufacturing a confrontation. I was doing what I should have done 18 months earlier before I let the situation become what it had become. I was getting my house in order, literally. The conversation happened 3 weeks after Derek's kitchen proposal on a Saturday afternoon in November. I was in the garage, reorganizing June's old garden tools, deciding what to donate to the community shed at the church down the street, and I heard the side door open. My daughter came and stood in the garage doorway, still in her coat, and I knew from the way she held herself that something had been said. Derek told me about his idea, she said, about the house. I kept my hands busy with a bag of topsoil that needed moving. I know. He shouldn't have brought it up without me. She said it carefully like she'd rehearsed it. That wasn't right. No, I agreed. It wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then, but Dad, he's not entirely wrong about the space. I mean, we've been down there a year and a half and it's getting cramped, and with everything we've been talking about. I set down the topsoil. I turned around. What have you been talking about? I asked. She looked at the floor for a second. We've been trying. For a baby. It hasn't happened yet, but eventually, if it does, the basement. Your mother and I raised you in 700 square feet in North York, I said, not unkindly. Before we bought this house. I know. You were fine. I know, Dad. I looked at my daughter who had her mother's eyes and her mother's way of going quiet when she was trying not to cry, and I felt something in my chest that wasn't anger, something older and sadder than anger. I'm not moving to the basement, I said. She nodded quickly, like she'd expected that. I figured I wanted to have the conversation myself, instead of leaving it to him. I appreciate that. She helped me carry the garden tools to the donation pile. We didn't talk much after that, but before she went inside, she stopped and said, without turning around, he's not a bad person, Dad. He grew up differently. He doesn't always see things the way. I know, I said. I did know. That was almost the hardest part. Derek wasn't a villain. He was a 34-year-old man who had spent his entire adult life in an environment where someone else managed the difficult logistics of survival, and who had therefore never developed the particular muscles you build when you have to carry your own weight. He wasn't cruel. He was just soft in the places that matter and completely unaware of it. That doesn't make it easier. Sometimes it makes it harder. December arrived. My daughter worked long hours at the clinic before the holidays. Derek did not work long hours, because Derek had left his job at the logistics company in October, had told me this as a footnote, almost, one morning when I passed him on the stairs, and was exploring options. I did not ask what options. I had a feeling I didn't want to know. The joint account showed 2 charges I didn't recognize, one to a subscription gaming service I'd never heard of, one to a restaurant on Queen Street East, $112, on a Wednesday afternoon when my daughter had been at work and I had been at my sister's place in Hamilton. I looked at the charge for a long time. I called my financial advisor again. The account was restructured by the end of the week. Derek's access was removed. I did it quietly, without announcement. The lawyer's revised documents arrived in a sealed envelope, which I placed in the filing cabinet in my bedroom and did not discuss with anyone. On Christmas Eve, we had dinner together, just the 3 of us, because Derek's family had their own plans, and my daughter's only other close family was a cousin in Calgary who hadn't been back east in years. I made the roast my daughter had loved since she was small. We sat at the table June had picked out at an antique market in Elora in 2003. We used the good plates. Derek was pleasant. He told a funny story about a neighbor. He helped clear the table without being asked, which I noticed, because it was unusual. My daughter was happy in that particular way she gets when the people she loves are in the same room and no one is fighting, and I didn't want to disturb that, so I let it be a good evening. I chose to let it be good. But later, after my daughter had gone to bed and Derek and I were alone in the kitchen for a few minutes, he said something that I've turned over in my mind many times since. He said, "You know, Gordon, at some point you're going to have to think about what happens to this place." I was putting the leftover roast into a container. I didn't look up. "I think about it," I said. "I mean, practically, you're 63, you're on your own in a 4-bedroom house. It's a lot to manage." I snapped the lid on the container. I put it in the fridge. I washed my hands at the sink. "I manage fine," I said. "Sure now." He leaned against the counter, my counter, with his arms crossed. Not aggressive, conversational, almost friendly, but it's worth thinking about. What makes sense long term, for everyone? I dried my hands on the dish towel. I folded it and put it back on the oven handle. "Good night, Derek," I said. I went to my room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, June's side, the right side, the side I still haven't been able to sleep on, and I stared at the wall for a while. And something settled in me. Not anger, not even sadness exactly. More like clarity, the kind that comes when you've been uncertain about something for a long time, and then suddenly you're not. I knew what I was going to do. In January, I contacted a real estate agent, not to sell, not yet, and possibly not ever, but to understand, to know precisely what I was holding and what choices I actually had. The agent was a brisk woman who'd sold 3 houses on my street in the past 5 years. She walked through my house on a Thursday afternoon while my daughter was at work, and Derek was, as far as I knew, exploring options somewhere. She gave me a number that was higher than even I had expected. I also called my daughter's godfather, a semi-retired lawyer named Stuart, who had known our family for 30 years. I asked him a specific question about a specific legal instrument. He answered it specifically. We had coffee. I thanked him and drove home. I started carrying a notebook, not for any particular reason, just to write things down. Dates, amounts, observations, the kind of record-keeping that seems excessive when things are fine and becomes essential when they're not. My daughter noticed the notebook on the kitchen table one morning and asked what I was working on. "Just organizing," I said. She looked at me for a second with her mother's eyes. "Dad, are you okay?" I'm good, I said. I'm actually pretty good. She seemed to believe me, maybe because it was true. February brought two things: a cold snap that dropped Toronto to -23 and the conversation that ended the question of how long this particular arrangement was going to continue. My daughter had gone to her book club, a Wednesday evening thing she'd kept up through years of being busy, one of the few things that was entirely hers. Derek and I were in the house together, which happened occasionally and which we both navigated by largely ignoring each other. I was in the living room reading when he came upstairs and sat down across from me in a way that indicated he wanted to talk. I put my book down. "I want to be straight with you," he said. I noticed he'd been drinking, not drunk, but the particular looseness of someone 2 beers past his usual self-editing. "I think there's tension between us, and I think it's because of the thing I brought up in October, the floor thing." "Okay," I said. "And I get that you don't want to move. I get that, but I want you to understand where I'm coming from. We've been here 18 months. We're paying a token amount of rent." "No rent," I said. "You've paid no rent." He paused. "We contribute to utilities." "Sometimes," I kept my voice level, "and sometimes not." A flicker of something crossed his face. Not quite guilt, not quite irritation. A hybrid. "Look, I'm not trying to argue accounting. What I'm saying is, I've done the math on this house. You know what this place is worth, what the equity is. And meanwhile, we're living in a basement trying to start a family, and you're just sitting on it." Sitting on it. I let those words sit in the air for a moment. "You've done the math on my house," I said. "I'm being practical. You've calculated the equity in my house and arrived at the conclusion that I'm hoarding resources that should be available to you." "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." He was quiet. "Derek," I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded. "This house was built by 31 years of my work and 34 years of my marriage. My wife is in this garden. My daughter grew up on this floor. The math you've done, that calculation doesn't include any of that, and I don't expect it to. But I need you to understand that what you're asking for, whatever you think you're asking for, is not yours. It has never been yours, and it won't be." He didn't say anything for a long time. "Then she's going to have to choose eventually between her father's house and her husband's future." I picked up my book. "Good night, Derek," I said. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was upset, or not only because of that, mostly because I was thinking through logistics, step by step, the way I used to think through a structural problem on a job site. Identify the load, identify the failure points, decide what needs to change before something collapses. By morning, I knew what I was going to do and in what order I was going to do it. I called Stuart again, then my financial advisor. Then I drove to a property management company near Victoria Park and asked some questions about basement suite rental rates in Scarborough. The woman I spoke with was helpful. She gave me a range. It was, as it turned out, considerably more than zero. I did not tell Derek any of this. I did tell my daughter. I asked her to meet me for lunch on her Friday. She had every other Friday off, a schedule she'd worked out with the clinic. We went to the Vietnamese place on Lawrence that we'd been going to since she was in university. I ordered the soup, the way I always do. She ordered the vermicelli, the way she always does. I told her what Derek had said. All of it, October, December, February, not as an accusation, as information she was owed. She listened without interrupting, which is something she's always been good at. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at a bowl. "He didn't tell me about the February conversation," she said. "I know." "Or December." "I know." She looked up. "Dad, I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize for him." "No, I know. She pressed her lips together. "I knew something was wrong. I felt it for months. I kept thinking it was just adjustment. That he'd settle in, find work, get his footing." She paused. "He hasn't found work. Get his footing." She paused. "He hasn't found work." "I know. I've been covering our portion of everything since October. I didn't tell you because I was embarrassed. She said the last word quietly, like it cost her something. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. He's my husband. Yes. I chose him. Yes. We sat with that for a minute. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to give him a formal notice that the basement suite arrangement will end in 60 days, I said. I've spoken to Stuart. As a formal tenancy, which it wasn't since no rent was exchanged, the situation is uncomplicated. I'll be converting the suite to a rental. I've already looked at the market rate. She stared at me. You're renting out the basement? Yes, after that moved out. Where are we supposed to go? That, I said, gently but clearly, is something you and Derek will need to figure out together. There are 2-bedroom apartments in this neighbourhood between $2,100 and $2,600 a month. On your income alone, you could manage it. On 2 incomes, it would be comfortable. I looked at her. I will help you with a damage deposit. I will help you move. I will be here for you in every way I am able to be. But I can't continue to subsidize a situation that is being used by your husband as leverage against me in my own home. My daughter was quiet for a long time. She was doing the thing a mother used to do, not crying but holding very still, the way you do when you are deciding whether to let yourself cry or not. I know this is hard, I said. He's going to be furious. Probably. He'll say I didn't warn him, that you blindsided him. You can tell him I've been thinking about it since October. She almost laughed at that. Almost. Her mother's almost laugh. Are you okay? She asked me. I'm good, I said. I'm actually pretty good. The notice was delivered the following Monday. A formal letter, printed on paper, slid under the basement door in the morning while Derek was still asleep and my daughter was at work. It outlined the end of the informal accommodation arrangement in 60 days, provided a reference to the Ontario Residential Tenancies Act, confirming no tenancy had been formally established, and wished them well in their next chapter. I know, it was cold. My daughter told me when she called that afternoon that he'd been on the phone with his mother for 2 hours, that he used words I'd rather not repeat, that he'd asked her directly whether she was on his side or her father's side. I know what I hoped she said. I don't know for certain what she actually said. Some things are between a husband and a wife, even when the husband has made a thorough mess of things. What I do know is that she called me that evening and she said, Dad, I think I need to talk to someone, like a professional someone. That's a good idea, I said. Not because I'm falling apart, just because there's a lot to sort through. That's the best reason, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, he says you're punishing him. I'm renting out my basement, I said. I'm 63 years old and I'm converting unused space into income. That's not punishment. That's retirement planning. Another almost laugh. I love you, Dad. I love you too. It has been 4 months since I delivered that letter. My daughter and Derek are renting a 2-bedroom apartment in East York, about 12 minutes from me. She chose it. She told me she wanted to stay close. We have dinner together every couple of weeks, just the 2 of us, at the Vietnamese place or at my kitchen table. Derek has come twice. Both times were quiet and careful and civil, which is all I've asked for. He found work, a logistics coordinator position back in his field. My daughter told me without making it into a big thing, which I appreciated. The basement suite has been rented since March. A couple, both graduate students at U of T. Quiet, respectful, pay on the first without being reminded. The income has changed my monthly math in ways I hadn't let myself plan on while the previous arrangement was making it feel impossible. I still carry the notebook. Old habits. There's a file in my bedroom cabinet, the revised will, the documents Stuart helped me with, some other things I'd rather have in order than not. I don't look at it often. Just knowing it's there is enough. Some mornings I sit on the back porch with my coffee and look at the Japanese maple June planted, and I think about what she would say about all of this. I think she'd have some feelings about how long it took me to act. She'd express those feelings directly and without softening them, because she was honest in a way that I always admired and occasionally needed to brace myself for. But I think she'd also know that it came out right, not perfectly, but right. My daughter called last week. She sounded different on the phone than she has in a while, lighter, somehow. She asked if she could come over Sunday and help me start the garden. June's gardened along the back fence. She said she wanted to learn what everything was. She said she never actually paid attention before, and she was sorry about that. I told her to come whenever she wanted. Sunday morning she showed up at 8:30 with coffee and a pair of gardening gloves she bought at Canadian Tire, sensible ones with grip on the palms. We crouched in the cold spring soil and I told her the names of things: the bleeding heart, the creeping phlox, the hosta that June had divided 4 times because she said it was happier when it had room to spread. My daughter listened the way she always has, carefully, like things mattered. The maple was still bare, just the start of buds. By October it'll be red again. I keep thinking about the moment I put that letter under the basement door. The house was quiet. The recycling bag was still by the side entrance. It had been there for 5 days. I slid the envelope through the gap, straightened up, and walked back to the kitchen to make coffee. No dramatic music, no shaking hands, just the sound of the kettle. People ask me sometimes when I tell pieces of this story whether I feel guilty, whether I was too hard on him. I've sat with that question honestly because I think it deserves an honest answer. And what I keep coming back to is this: I didn't act out of anger. I acted out of clarity. There's a difference, and the difference matters. Anger would have had me shouting in the kitchen the night he said I was sitting on my own house. Clarity had me finishing my coffee, saying goodnight, and spending the next 3 months getting my paperwork in order. What Derek did, and I don't think he ever fully understood this, was treat my home as a balance sheet with no human beings on it. He did the math correctly as far as it went. The equity was real. The square footage was real. What he left out was every morning I drove to a job site in the dark, every decision June and I made about what to spend and what to save, every year we chose the house over the vacation or the new car. You can't calculate 31 years of work and then declare yourself entitled to the result. That's not how any of this functions. I think the hardest part of the whole thing wasn't Derek. It was watching my daughter carry something she shouldn't have had to carry alone. She covered his expenses for months without telling me, not because she was deceiving me, but because she was embarrassed, and that embarrassment came from somewhere good in her. She still believed in the version of her husband she'd married, and she was trying to protect that version a little longer. I understand that. I don't think it was wrong of her, but it cost her something, that silence, and I could see it costing her in the way her face looked when she thought no one was watching. Here's what I've come to understand about how situations like this actually unfold. They don't happen because one person is evil and another is a saint. They happen through accumulation. A small convenience becomes an assumption becomes an expectation. An expectation, if it goes unchallenged long enough, starts to feel like a right. I let the accumulation go on for 18 months because I told myself I was being generous. And I was at first, but at some point generosity without boundary stops being a gift and starts being a foundation someone else is building on without your permission. What got me through it wasn't any single decision. It was the daily choice to stay clear-headed, to keep asking myself what was actually true, not just what was comfortable. To know the numbers in my own accounts, the terms of my own documents, the rights I actually had in my own home. Knowledge isn't cold when it protects the people you love. It's one of the most useful things you can bring to a hard situation. And then the harder thing, the willingness to act on what you know, even when acting is uncomfortable, even when the person affected is sleeping 12 feet below your kitchen floor, even when the woman you love most in this world is going to have a painful conversation with her husband because of what you've done. I didn't enjoy any of it, but I stayed steady through it because the alternative, going soft, going quiet, letting it keep accumulating, would have cost more in the end. My daughter came over Sunday. She wore gardening gloves with grip on the palms. She crouched in the cold dirt and asked me the names of things, and she listened like it mattered. That's what I worked for. That's what it was always about.